Players like Jahan Dotson, Marvin Mims, and Tajay Spears disappointed greatly after being hyped as sleepers last season. However, were we just 1 year too early? We talk through post-hype sleeper candidates and tell you if you should hop back on their train on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL, fantasy betting, all that good stuff at sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. All right, we're going to talk through some guys that heavily disappointed last year. After every year, we like to talk up sleepers, right? We like to say guys that you can draft, later in rounds 8 or later that we get excited about. We really talk ourselves into, and then they disappoint greatly. That happens every year, but sometimes we're just 1 year too early, right? They needed more time in the league or they need a different system. So we're going to talk about some guys that are post-hype sleep candidates, and we're going to explain if we're on the train to, get back on their hype train or we're just staying off of it this year. So let's start with some wide receiver candidates that could be on this train. He's not so much a sleeper, I'll say that, but Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Seahawks wide receiver. He is going wide receiver 43 right now, so pretty late in drafts. Last year, he was obviously hyped because he was a first-round wide receiver. Now, people were worried because he was playing with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But there was a ton of hype coming out of training camp saying, no, he's going to get so many targets. He's going to be the wide receiver 2 on this team. That didn't happen, right? He only had more than 7 targets in one game last year. So what are your thoughts on Jaxon Smith-Njigba now that he's still stuck with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett? But will he see more volume in his second season?
Yeah, I mean, I love this buzzword in fantasy football, post-type sleepers. It's a thing that we only use in fantasy football. I don't think I've ever heard it in any other profession anywhere else. But it's a fun thing to talk about because it's like, okay, we saw these guys become busts, and the natural thing to do in our industry is to drop them down a few notches in the rankings, and that makes them a potential better value for the next year. And you look at Jaxon Smith-Njigba, he was overhyped last year. Let's be honest. It was a team that had 2 established wide receivers and not a team that would throw off into the third wide receiver in this scheme here. Now it's a little bit different. We have Geno Smith still at quarterback, but we know we're going to a different style of offense. We're going to the Washington Huskies offense coming over from down the street in Seattle. So no more Shane Waldron, so that opens things up. And also another development here is Tyler Lockett is getting a little older. I think they realize that. They're keeping him around, but they drafted JSN to be kind of his replacement, a guy that you can put all over the field. And keep in mind, JSN was the first wide receiver drafted in a very good class last year. So, again, he's maybe the forgotten guy. We talk about Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and all their buzz for year 3. We have Marvin Harrison here as the hyped rookie coming out of Ohio State. But don't forget about JSN. He was very productive, and injury kind of slowed him down there at the end of his career at Ohio State. But the Seahawks had a nice grade on him. I think they'll open up the offense a little bit more. You're not going to see the stodgy working a gazillion tight ends with Noah Fant. I think they have to spread the field a little bit with Geno Smith, and that's going to help. And again, I think there's that slow transition. I think it'll happen a little bit faster this year where JSN kind of replaces Lockett as that number 2 that's consistently out there. Lockett, keep in mind, is above their 30 years old. So this is all good stuff here for JSN. So again, I wouldn't go nuts. I think this is about the right ranking for him, but you could end up, I'd say, with a pretty solid wide receiver 3 if you get him at this value.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 options for him to break out this year. It's either Tyler Lockett being 32 years old at the start of the season. He continues to wear down. His efficiency went down in every area last year in yards per reception and catch percentage, and he got 122 targets. Tyler Lockett shouldn't be getting 122 targets. Then you also have, if this team isn't winning games, right? They do have new coaches. They do have Geno Smith, right? Geno Smith can get the balls to these guys and make them good fantasy players, but is he a winner? We shall see. But if they start losing games towards the deadline, DK Metcalf could be getting traded, right? We've already hearing rumblings this offseason. So there's multiple ways that JSN could break out this year. I like him at that discount at wide receiver 43. I think people are very much overlooking him. What about Jahan Dotson? The guy I was hyping up like crazy as my sleeper last year. Was I just a year too early? He gets Jaden Daniels this year, right? He gets a new offensive coordinator in Cliff Kingsbury. We know Kingsbury can get fantasy points out of his players. He did that with the Cardinals. We know Jaden Daniels fed both Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. at LSU. Also, with Daniel's play style, I don't expect him to be dumping the ball off too much to Austin Eckler or to Zach Ertz if either of those guys have anything left in them. So I do think that Jaden Daniels will be utilizing his wide receivers more down the field. But is Dotson him, right? Does he have it in him to be a good NFL player? We really don't know yet.
Yeah, I do love Terry McLaurin. We've talked about this a lot. I was excited to draft him in our Dynasty Superflex League because he's still pretty young and he still has some upside and he hasn't had a quarterback of this caliber. Now, the question is, does it trickle down to Dotson? Now, with running quarterbacks, we typically don't see them checking down a lot, so maybe not Eckler being involved, but Daniels will take off and run a little bit more. Now, it's also interesting when you look at this receiving core here. How does the transition happen? If Zach Ertz slows down and Ben Sinnott, or Senate, I should say, gets going as the rookie tight end, do we have a transition there? And do we not want to trust too many rookies in the Cliff Kingsbury offense? And the same thing could happen at that third spot where it's a Luke McCaffrey trying to fight for some key targets there as potentially the third receiver. So there's a lot of things that are developing there that you're not sure of, but right now, that would make Dotson a veteran on this team in terms of being on this team and knowing the system a little bit in terms of playing with McLaurin. Now, it's a new system overall that he's learning offensively, but I think, as you mentioned, it'll benefit him here. Daniels has a big arm. Dotson's a field stretcher. He had zero chemistry with Sam Howell last year that we thought was good, and it didn't really happen. And it just, I guess Sam Howell was just bad because he didn't have chemistry with him or McLaurin. So I think that'll change here with Daniels. I think he's just more excitable, right? I mean, these receivers are going to be hyped to play with him. I don't think Sam Howell, no offense to him, he's just not going to get you jacked up. He doesn't have the arm to say, I want to get downfield for this guy and make big plays. So I think Dotson has that potential. I think we looked at him with the speed out of Penn State. So I love it here as someone we're watching. This is a total value right now. He's going as wide receiver 58. So one of the last wide receiver fives on the board. And this could give you really good value here at some point. So even if he's a guy as a wide receiver 40 play him, I think there's some real value with Dotson.
Yeah, it's interesting because last year, the first half of the year, he was getting targets, 57 targets for weeks 1 through 9, second on the team, 6.3 targets per game. The second half, it's almost like the team gave up on him, went down to 3.3 targets per game, 26 targets. Like, it'll be interesting to see what he can do in this new system.
No Samuel help too. Yeah, I think, that's part of it as well.
Would you rather take a risk on Jahan Dotson at wide receiver 58 or Marvin Mims, who's going a little bit later, wide receiver 66? But at this point, they're all just, you're spending a very late round pick on them. Marvin Mims, first year player with the Broncos last year as a rookie, comes in second year. He's a third round guy. Now, people were hyping him last year. I was excited to see what he can do. But also now this year, he's getting a lot of hype. So maybe this post-hype sleeper thing's already happening for him. But I don't know if I'm as high on Marvin Mims. Tim Patrick's coming back from injury. We'll see if he can. It's two devastating injuries back to back. They did sign Josh Reynolds. They drafted Troy Franklin. I know it wasn't until the 4th round, but that's Bo Nix's boy. Like, that's the quarterback's man from college. And also, the thing with Marvin Mims is would be best used as that deep threat. And Bo Nix is really not that guy to throw deep balls. The only time he did it was to Troy Franklin. So I just don't know if he's going to push the ball downfield for Marvin Mims and take those chances, especially Marvin Mims' statue's much smaller than Franklin as well. So I'm out on Marvin Mims, but do you think he's a good post-type sleeper candidate?
Well, in the state of the Broncos passing game right now, I think you'll see Troy Franklin step up a little bit, and he could develop into that Jerry Jeudy role. That's the biggest void here in this offense. And now you have Cortland Sutton still hanging around. He's not a scrub. I mean, he can be pretty good if he plays. So you got to see where the targets are coming from. Will they incorporate the tight ends a little bit more? They have a couple athletes there that they could consider. So are they in the mix here? Does Franklin emerge with Nix, as you mentioned? So there's all kinds of wild cards here. And Tim Patrick, keep in mind, he was a thorn in the side of the production of Sutton and Jeudy when he was around, because he just seemed to be more technically reliable than them, but he's had 2 major knee injuries. So I don't know how that's going to play out. But I don't know. I have to see kind of how the Broncos play out. And I would say the Broncos are one of those teams, buyer beware, a team that you may be out on totally in fantasy, but I think there's also some value to be found there. So I want to wait, but I think I'm out on Mims. I think, look at SmithNjigba and Dotson. They're first round picks for a reason. And Mims fell a little bit as a big play threat for that reason. So if they were really happy about Mims, I don't know if they would have been so concerned with getting Franklin with Nix this year.
Yeah, I like Mims as a player. I just don't like his situation. So I'm also out on him a little bit higher on Dotson. And then, go in on Jaxon Smith-Njigba at that cost. Like, what a great cost. We're going to get into some running back candidates for post-hype sleepers for the 2024 season. Tajay Spears is now going up against Tony Pollard, who's not a post-hype sleeper, but maybe a post-hype elite player. I don't know. We'll get into it in our next segment. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the GameTime app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. GameTime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. Baseball season is the best season to use this app. I'm telling you, if you live near a stadium, just any given day, you might feel like going to a game, but you don't have tickets yet. Don't worry, GameTime has your back. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL. LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Very first guy off the bat here for a post-type running back sleeper is Tajay Spears, right? Because there's rumors going, not rumors, but the thought process going around last year is Derrick Henry's getting old, right? Like, how much longer can he do this for? It turns out he's going to do it forever, for the rest of his life. But now Derrick Henry's finally off the team. So maybe we were just 1 year too early. Now, unfortunately, they signed Tony Pollard. So now he has to compete against him. Their draft prices are pretty similar. Running back 25 for Pollard, running back 33 for Spears. Now, we could even put Pollard in this category. Obviously, he wasn't a sleeper last year, but he was a huge hype guy, right? And he failed. Were we just 1 year too early on Tony Pollard as well? Could he be a top 10 running back with the Titans? So let's talk about these two guys with Pollard and Spears. Who do you think is a workhorse in this backfield?
Yeah, I think they're kind of giving you the indication. I mean, not just from what we saw with Spears last year, but also adding Pollard and seeing how Pollard did not fare well, kind of handling the big load in Dallas without Ezekiel. I think they're telling you that there's going to be a split situational backfield with these two. They like both of these guys. I think Pollard is going to be in line, as we would kind of loosely base it, as the early down, kind of the touchdown guy, but he wasn't good at scoring touchdowns last year. So it could reverse, and Spears could be the receptions guy and the scoring guy because he's a little bit more versatile near the goal line. So there's a lot of things to unpack here. We haven't really talked too much about the Titans offense, what we think will happen with Brian Callahan and Will Levis. It's a influx team, right? We have Calvin Ridley in there with DeAndre Hopkins. They're upgraded the offensive line again with J.C. Latham. So there's all kinds of intrigue over the Titans. It's kind of the anti-version of the Broncos, where there's a lot of unproven, but I'm intrigued. I want to have a little piece of this offense because I think it's going to be exciting. We know Brian Callahan came from the Bengals. That team gave you a variety of good fantasy assets when he was there. So I'm just going to wait and see what we have here. But I would think I would draft Pollard still ahead of Spears, but Spears might end up being the better value. Like their production could be closer than you think as we go forward. So I'm very intrigued, but I also like it that you don't have to spend a lot to get either of these guys. You can stash them as a nice wide receiver or running back 3 and equivalent of a good flex play in deep league. So I like that, where I think they're both going to have some value. And yeah, just don't overhype them. They're telling you exactly this is a split. Both are going to have some value. Our best case scenario, Michelle, is if this ends up as a slightly better version of Najee Harris and Jalen Warren.
I do think like maybe Tony Pollard is being taken too far down this year just because of the expectations he had last year and he didn't meet them. But really, he didn't meet them because of the rushing touchdowns, right? They weren't coming.
Yeah.
And we know the Titans scored a lot of rushing touchdowns with Derrick Henry, completely different rushers, completely different body sizes. It does not mean Pollard is going to score a lot of touchdowns. But I mean, Pollard does rank 7th among running backs in rushing yards, 7th in scrimmage yards, 8th in scrimmage touchdowns among running back, or actually just in the NFL. No, among running backs, sorry. Since 2022. So over the last 2 years, like he's getting it done. He's one of 4 running backs with 1,300 plus scrimmage yards in each of the last 2 seasons with Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Travis Etienne. It's really the touchdowns that killed him last year. And we know those are so sporadic, right? 1 year you can score 12, 1 year you might score 5. Like those can go up and down. So I do think maybe we're devaluing Pollard a little bit. Unfortunately for Tajay Spears, I don't expect much from him. He played a lot of snaps last year, just not getting the volume he needs. And with Brian Callahan there as OC, I expect him to just use one running back a ton like he did with Joe Mixon. But let me ask you, would you rather? So Tony Pollard right now is going right around Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, Zamir White. Out of those 4, I think I prefer Pollard. White is interesting, but I still think I prefer Pollard out of those 4. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm all about DeAndre Swift here. I think he's going to have a bigger role than we think in Chicago. So I just see the investment in Swift and that whole offense, and that offense I think is going to be better than some of those other offenses you mentioned. So I do like Swift quite a bit. I mean, Pollard, I agree. I think there should be a little bit more value to him than a RB3, which is he's at the borderline. I think you can look at him as an RB2. I think just don't be surprised if it gets flipped. In our heads, we're thinking Spears is the guy that's the change of pace little guy. But remember, Tony Pollard was that explosive guy that had those long runs for the Cowboys. And he's coming off an injury too. So keep that in mind. So it could be more split than we think. But again, the guy that you're going to probably be starting in more weeks is going to be Pollard, not Spears.
Yeah. Now, what about Javon Williams? He's going as RB27 right now. He's kind of in that dead man's land. But I do think we forget he was coming off the torn ACL, right? It was so gross last year. His efficiency was so gross. But at the same time, we had to think coming off a devastating knee injury in 2022, it can take guys 2 years to come back and be themselves again. Now we've never seen it from him, right? For fantasy, his first year, he didn't get as much work as we wanted because he was splitting with Melvin Gordon. Then he tore his ACL in week 4 in 2022. And last year was so bad, but he did lead the Broncos in rush attempts by far. I mean, he had 217. The next closest was McLaughlin at 76. And then he also led the team in running backs in targets at 58. So he was a big part of their offense, even though he struggled with efficiency. But do you think it was just the ACL, or do you just think he's not a very good player?
Well, to me, Javon Williams is not a post-type sleeper. He's like a post-type, I don't know, zombie, you want to call it, and we have to wake him up, and he's got to get up. Like, he was just really disappointing, and he's been so hyped, and then the crash has been so huge, and we do like Audric Estime. That was a good addition by them. We do like Julian McLaughlin, so he's there, but I think some things were just really awry. As Michelle's pointed out several times, this Broncos team actually run blocked well last year. So there's some things opening. I think Sean Payton will try to run his style of offense. And I think Javon Williams, keep in mind, came on a little bit as a receiver down the stretch last year. So I think that role could resume here at some point. I think McLaughlin is just too small to hold up, and Estime might actually be too big or too inexperienced to keep on the field, especially with a rookie quarterback if there's pass protection involved. So I look at this and say, okay, He's not a bad flyer, but I wouldn't say that he's 2 spots here behind Pollard. I think Pollard's in a better situation. So I think I would bump Pollard up. I think I would keep Williams right about here. I think we need a little bit more positive reports from training camp to feel good that I can say he's an RB2. But right now, he's a flex flyer to me.
Yeah, the guys going after him with Connor, Swift, Pollard, even Zamir White, definitely Zach Moss. Like, I want all those guys over him. So Javonte Williams won't be on any of my teams. Now, one more running back to hit on quickly here before we move on to our quarterbacks and tight ends. But Kendre Miller with the Saints, right, going into his second year, he was getting hyped last year because Alvin Kamara was going to miss the first 3 games, right? He was going to have his chance to prove it. And then hopefully they'd split the backfield after that. Unfortunately, he got a knee injury in preseason, then a hamstring injury in preseason, and then he also dealt with an ankle injury later on in the year. But so he never played more than 26 snaps in a game, had his career high week in week 18. But were we just 1 year too early? Will he be healthier this year? Does Alvin Kamara get cut? Turning 29 years old in a couple months. The Saints saved $10 million this year and $25 million on the cap in 2025 if they cut him post June 1st. I'm surprised they haven't already cut him and designated him that. But what's going on there? I don't know. But Kendre Miller, sneaky pick there later in drafts at running back 49.
Yeah, and last year he was also hurt by the fact that they signed Jamal Williams, so he thought he was going to be the touchdown guy, and Kamara was still around, and we didn't see where the path to the key touches were for Miller. But now they're there, and his own injury just kind of threw everything off. So now he's healthy. Kamara is a little older. He's expensive. I still think they'll keep Kamara at this point because I think that receiving aspect from last year, they totally won't forget, right? He was key at some points, but that was his only value, as we've talked about. He wasn't explosive. He wasn't doing a lot. He was just racking up catches and helping you in half and full PPR. So when you look at Miller, yeah, he's a very good talent here, and it's just about opportunity for him. It's a different offense here with Clint Kubiak. Are they going to give him that opportunity to shine here? So again, another team – backfield I'm going to play really close attention to as we go in minicamp and training camp. What are the reports? What are the reps splitting up here? So this is why it's good to talk about this early to kind of have that. But RB49, I mean, that's whatever. That's a really good deal. You're taking him as an RB5. Yeah, that's a guy with upside. Those are one of those picks where I tend to draft in some leagues 6 running backs, and this is the guy that is perfect. I'm just going to stash.
At that point, you're taking him over Antonio Gibson, Rico Dowdle, Tyler Algier. Like, just take him.
Lottery ticket back. He's a classic lottery ticket back. You could really end up big time hitting a home run with him. So, yeah, those guys are worth mentioning. And again, I think the hype is more fair this year, and I'd say I think he's been knocked down too far there at RB49.
Agree.
All right, we will get into our choices here at quarterback and tight end in our final segment. Some big names there at quarterback that really let us down last year. We're hoping to rebound here in 2024. All right, listen up. It's a big night in the NBA. We have 2 pivotal game 5s. They're all pivotal game 5s, especially when it's 2-2. And you look at the Knicks and Pacers, some bad blood in that series here. I think the Knicks are going to take care of business at home and get back on track here to win the series. And I think the same goes for the Nuggets. I think they found something with Jokic and Murray taking over with their scoring. So I think I love those 2 teams to take care of business at home. And if you want to get in on the action for those games in the NBA or the NHL tonight, it's winner take all time in these playoffs, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count for you. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Michelle, these are 2 guys that really disappointed. I really liked both of them. I'll say I backed them pretty heavily last year, but things just fell apart for them really quickly here. So let's reveal our 2 quarterbacks here. Trevor Lawrence, he's at QB 16. Aaron Rodgers at QB 20. What do you feel about these 2 guys, and where would you go for a value? I mean, they're both buried with the QB 2s at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Trevor Lawrence year was weird, right? Because Travis Etienne was stealing like all the rushing touchdowns, all the touchdowns to start the year. Sorry if you hear the loudest lawnmower of all time that my neighbor's using right now. But so he really, really struggled for the first 10 weeks. But then he started to get going because Etienne stopped scoring touchdowns. I will say, though, during his 3-week span where he was going off, right, he scored 4 rushing touchdowns during that time. So that's also hard to say that will keep up. I do expect Lawrence to be better than he was last year. I just feel like everything went against him. And then as soon as he started like to catch heat, that's when he got injured, right, with his ankle. And then it all went downhill from there. He was trying to play through really bad injury. He shouldn't have done that probably. But, you do get rid of Calvin Ridley, but at the same time, they didn't have a good connection anyways. You add Brian Thomas, you add Gabe Davis, you still have Evan Ingram. You're adding a healthy Christian Kirk back. Like, I like his weapons. The only question is like who he's going around. I think like I would rather go with Kirk Cousins, right? Who's going after him. I would rather just take Jared Goff the one round ahead that you have to.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Trevor Lawrence will be on any of my teams because I don't know if he's dropped far enough, but he has dropped significantly where I think his price at quarterback 16, 98th overall is fair.
Yeah, I think he's a great quarterback to target in Superflex and 2 QB leagues as your second QB. I mean, I think some people forget about him, and you can get some pretty good value there. And as well as deeper leagues, we have 14 teamers, and you may want to punt on quarterback or play the platoon system. I think you could play the matchups here with Lawrence with another quarterback. So I can't believe we're talking about him because last year he was talked about as a QB 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere there with Joe Burrow. So again, Lawrence will have a rebound season. I think there's a chance for him to bridge that gap quite a bit here from QB 16. And there's an outside shot that he can finish in the top 12. I think that's fair to say because he's got that much talent. And we'll see about the contract. He is getting his 5th-year option for 2025, but you might be a little bit motivated or trying to justify a contract. One of the two things will happen here where that might get some better play. But Michelle's right on. I mean, this is a guy that moves around a lot. He was hurt. That really affected him, as well as sneakily Zay Jones being out, I think needing some depth and consistency at receiver, and I think he'll get that. Now, Aaron Rodgers is an interesting one. We know that he's going to play again on Monday night in week 1. Don't get hurt this time. They're playing in San Francisco against Michelle's second team, the 49ers. So that's the first game. So right away, you could have Brock Purdy and Aaron Rodgers throwing like nuts. I don't quite get why he's buried down here. I get it in Dynasty why you have no part of Aaron Rodgers, but I don't get QB 20 necessarily. Like it's
because
just
there's
real
too
weird.
many good quarterbacks right now. When you go through the list, I was thinking that too when I first did it. And then I'm looking and I'm like, okay, well, I would rather take a shot on Caleb Williams. I would rather take a shot on Jaden Daniels. I would rather have Goff and Purdy and Matthew Stafford's close. Like, would you rather Stafford or Rodgers?
I think he, to me, is in that tough decision between him and Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins, keep in mind, is coming off the same injury. Yeah. He's on a new team that he's adjusting to new weapons. I mean, we know that Aaron Rodgers and we know Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall give him already a bump.
I will say my worry for Aaron Rodgers is the Jets' great defense, right? How much will they lean on their 40-year-old coming
in week 1? I don't think they're going to stop much in week 1, so that's good. But I look at that's a good point. I mean, they could be Robert Saleh. We're going to run the ball, do a lot of Breece Hall, and then be more calculated. And you still have to sort out the weapons. We're not sure if Malachi Corley and Mike Williams can be reliable here, as well as the tight end situation, which they didn't really upgrade. So it's hard. I mean, the offensive line, they're taking a shot on Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses and a rookie. So I'm not sure exactly what you're going to get. So I see all the downside, but does he have a little bit more upside because he moves around and he's Aaron Rodgers and Goff and Cousins and Stafford? Maybe. But those are the guys we're debating, not the youngsters like Williams and Daniels.
Yeah. Moving on to tight ends. Kyle Pitts. No, I mean, what is this? Like his 3rd year as post tight?
Every year he's not going to be on this list for now to the end of his career.
Finally moving down a little bit, right? Like last year he was still being drafted as a tight end 3, tight end 4 for no reason whatsoever. He's finally moving down a little bit, right around quarterback 6 or tight end 6, 7, depending on the league format you're in. It's kind of like in between Pitts, Ingram, and Kittle, whoever you kind of prefer there in that group. Now, Pitts his biggest issue is touchdowns, right? He has 6 touchdowns in his 3 years career, 1, 2, and 3. So maybe this year he'll score 4. That's the pattern here. But no, if he can't do it with Kirk Cousins, then he's never going to do it, right? So I do expect him to have a really nice year. It's Drake London, it's Bijan Robinson, and it's Kyle Pitts. Like those should be Kirk Cousins' 3 top targets, with Pitts being the second target. And he should have a really, really nice year. But at the same time, I think I would still prefer Evan Ingram, and I would still prefer Dalton Kincaid, who's going 1 round or 8 picks earlier. I would just rather take Kincaid 8 picks earlier than risk it with Pitts. But if you miss out on Kincaid and Ingram and Kittle, I'm fine with Pitts.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately going to still think about Pitts. I think actually not having the 12 personnel is going to help him, because that means no second tight end, and then he can operate really what he is like as the slot receiver. Darnell Mooney's not really the best inside guy, so he's more the outside receiver that's going to stretch the field from time to time here, opposite Drake London. So, yeah, I see Pitts in this offense should benefit him quite a bit here, and just opening things up, creating some space. And they've just poorly used him in the Arthur Smith era, and I don't think having an assistant from Sean McVay is going to do that again. They're going to see his talent and figure out what to do with it. Now, another guy, I just took him in our dynasty draft late, and I was just kind of sitting on him because I was loading up at other positions. It's one of Michelle's favorite guys, Pat Freiermuth, and I look at this
favorite guy. I don't know about that, but he does play for my favorite
he's
team.
key to your team winning games, I think. Yeah. But one thing I did look at him, and I did some research while I was looking, he's not been a regular snap guy. He's kind of been a situational guy where they put in blocking type areas. But we know, I just talked about Arthur Smith and the use of 12 personnel. Arthur Smith loves having tight ends on the field most of the time. And if they're going to have 1 tight end, 2, Pat Freiermuth is going to be on the field. So that helps him, right? And we talked about Russell Wilson throwing touchdown passes. I mean, the best sources of those are going to be George Pickens deep. You're going to have Pat Freiermuth in the red zone. And he was pretty good just 2 years ago. And look, he got derailed by injuries. The quarterback situation was bad. They weren't involving him much. The offense wasn't totally catering to him. But now you lose Deontay Johnson and those targets. Roman Wilson is still a rookie, so you're getting used to him here. So, and I know Russell Wilson's history with tight ends are not great, but still, I think he's got to throw to somebody, and I think this particular scheme that Wilson hasn't played in, I think that helps Freiermuth stay on the field.
Yeah, the thing with Freiermuth, it's so interesting. It's going to be so interesting to see this whole work out with the Steelers offense, because Arthur Smith loves to throw over the middle, right? And Russell Wilson hates to throw over the middle. Like, he will not do it. So it's going to be interesting. That's the only thing that worries me about Freiermuth. I love the system. I think he's going to be completely touchdown dependent, but with Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith's system, he could catch 10 touchdowns. So he could put up 600
Don't forget
yards.
about Jimmy Graham, right? Jimmy Graham and Russell Wilson had a little bit of things, so that could develop here. So, I mean, that's the one hope that I have for him. And yeah, I'm totally, he's not a volume tight end. He's going to be based on scoring. And
by the time you get down to tight end 16, you're choosing between him, Luke Musgrave. Maybe you want to take the upside with Musgrave, but Hunter Henry, Taysom Hill. Like, I like
down in the split, right? I mean, he's the guy, and there's nobody else really. I mean, I know they have a youngster, but I think he's the guy. So I do feel confident about that, and not a lot of target competition.
And then one more tight end, Jawan Johnson, going down to tight end 19. I really like him. So he dealt with a calf injury last year. The pregame in week 4, he missed a handful of games, came back. So he really didn't do anything at all until the end of the year. But we know that there was a shift in that offense last year with Derek Carr. They stopped throwing to Alvin Kamara. That wasn't winning. That was not winning them games. That was not good at all for the offense. And then they started winning games, and Jawan Johnson started becoming a big part of this offense. They really didn't add anyone. Maybe Rashid Shaheed breaks out even more this year, but I think Johnson's going to be a huge target for Derek Carr. And then also in the end zone, he had 4 receiving touchdowns last year. Again, barely played until the end of the year. He had 3 touchdowns over the last 4 games of the year. You have Jimmy Graham, who's gone. Somehow he caught 4 touchdowns. And then you also have Taysom Hill. He's turning 34 years old now. He caught 2 touchdowns last year, but he also took some rushing touchdowns away from opportunities. So I really think Jawan Johnson's snaps are going to go up. He's 27, really prime for a tight end to just have his best year. I love Jawan Johnson at tight end 19, because if you really punt the position, there is nobody else there that you can even consider, like Tyler Conklin, Cade Otton. I know you liked him, but like, no, Chigakonkwo, no. Like, I'm all in if you're punting to go with Juwan Johnson, or if it's a two tight end league or something like that.
The only reason we couldn't include Cade Otton in this discussion is because there's no hype around him. But I took him just to see. But I think there's some value to be had in these kind of sneaky passing games where there's an opening for that key third target. And I think the key third target is here. If Kamara gets faded a little bit, we know who the targets are going to be. It's going to be Olave, Shaheed, and some Johnson. And keep in mind, Derek Carlos on the tight end, Clint Kubiak's offense. He's going to see the parallels to the 49ers. We had Dalton Schultz in that type of offense with Bobby Slowick. He did a good job in fantasy with the Texans. So all kind of parallels to say Johnson will be more involved if he's healthy. So I like that call. And again, I think we're back to the take a tight end early or take a tight end late. I think we're back to that because there's some sneaky value here later, but you definitely want to try to get one of those elite guys. I would suggest that a little bit more and then add one of these guys as a backup for your teams.
Yeah, absolutely. The difference between like a Kincaid and a Juwan Johnson is probably going to be pretty significant, even though I like Johnson. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers, Vinnie and I will be back tomorrow with some more fantasy goodness. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.